The morning Emeka Obi first walked into the University of Lagos Faculty of Arts, he did not walk so much as he announced himself. He was 22. Broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, with the kind of easy confidence that made lecturers pause mid-sentence to watch him settle into a seat. He wore clothes that were not loud, no flashy chains, no oversized jacket, but they were precise. Tailored. The kind of quiet that said, I know exactly what I am worth, and I do not need your approval to confirm it. His father was Chukwuemeka Obi, not a household name to most Nigerians, but a name that opened doors in certain circles. A man who had built a mid-sized logistics empire in the southeast and then expanded it, quietly and steadily, into Lagos. Not wealthy enough to make headlines. Wealthy enough that his son had never once had to think about money and had, over time, stopped thinking about much else. Emeka was brilliant. That was not arrogance, it was fact. His WEC results had been flawless. His first-year university grades placed him among the top 10 students in his department. He could argue philosophy, dismantle an opponent's thesis in a seminar, and write an essay that made a lecturer sit back and exhale slowly. He knew this about himself, and he wore it like a second skin. The trouble with Emeka was not his intelligence. The trouble was what he had decided intelligence entitled him to. He decided it entitled him to interrupt, to speak over others in group discussions, not because he had something urgent to add, but because the silence of other people bored him. He decided it entitled him to arrive late to lectures without apology, to roll his eyes at questions he considered beneath him, and to treat the support staff, the cleaners, the gate security, the women who sold food at the campus canteen, as furniture. Not with cruelty, exactly. He was not a boy who punched walls or shouted at waiters. His arrogance was quieter than that, and in some ways more corrosive. It was the arrogance of a man who had simply never been told no in a way that mattered. His closest friend, Tunde Adeyemi, was a law student, tall, wiry, with a quick laugh and an even quicker tongue. Tunde was the kind of person who could make a lecture hall smile. He was also, in his own way, complicit in Emeka's worldview. Not because Tunde shared it, Tunde was sharper than that, more self-aware, but because he never pushed back. When Emeka dismissed a lecturer's comment with a wave of his hand, Tunde would catch the lecturer's eye and smile apologetically, as if to say, you know how he is.
It was easier that way.
Emeka was generous when he was in a good mood, which was often. And Tunde, despite his sharp mind, was not a man who liked to make waves. There were others in their circle, too. Chidinma, a biochemistry student who laughed at everything Emeka said. Obinna, who had grown up in the same estate in Enugu and carried the loyalty of shared history. And others whose names mattered less than the atmosphere they created, a small kingdom of ease and privilege that moved through the campus, like weather. It was a Thursday in late October, when things began to shift. The campus had been unsettled for days. Student union elections were approaching, and the air had that particular Nigerian university tension, not quite danger, but a heightened awareness of power and who wielded it. There had been a meeting the evening before in the main auditorium, one of those compulsory assemblies that no one wanted to attend but everyone did, because absence was noticed. Emeka had gone. He had sat in the back row, arms crossed, scrolling through his phone for most of it. The student union president, a serious young woman named Ifani, had spoken about campus safety, about the new security protocols being introduced after an incident the previous week involving a group of outsiders who had entered the campus through a rear gate. Emeka had not listened closely. He had, however, noticed one thing. The campus was becoming more crowded. More strangers. More faces that did not belong to the student body, drifting through the corridors and the market stalls that lined the edge of the campus.
He did not think much of it at the time.
That came later. The canteen near the Faculty of Arts was not a grand place. It was open air, shaded by corrugated iron sheets supported on wooden poles, with plastic chairs arranged in uneven rows around tables that wobbled if you leaned too hard. It served jollof rice, egusi soup, pounded yam, and the kind of fried plantain that students ate standing up, burning their fingers and not caring. Emeka came here most afternoons after his last lecture. Not because the food was exceptional, he had eaten better, but because it was convenient and because his group gravitated here. They would sit, talk, argue about nothing important, and occasionally about things that mattered. It was, in its way, one of the few places on campus where Emeka almost seemed like anyone else. Almost. On that Thursday afternoon, the canteen was busier than usual. The lunch rush had not yet cleared. Students were packed close together, voices overlapping, the clatter of plates and the hiss of oil in the cooking pots forming a familiar soundtrack. Emeka was walking toward his usual spot, the table near the back, under the sheet of corrugated iron that had been painted sky blue by some long-ago optimist, when he saw her. An old woman. She was sitting alone at a small table near the edge of the canteen, just inside the shade. She was small, not shrunken, exactly, but compact, as though life had slowly drawn her inward over the decades. Her wrapper was a muted purple, tied neatly at the waist. She wore a simple blouse, white with small floral prints, and her head wrap was the deep burgundy that older Igbo women favored. On the table in front of her was a cup of tea, not the kind served at the canteen, but something she had brought herself, in a thermos flask, and was pouring carefully into a ceramic mug. She was reading a book. Emeka glanced at her as he passed, the way one glances at a piece of scenery, and thought nothing of it. Old women appeared on campus sometimes. Grandmothers visiting. Women who had come to pay a bill at the bursary office or collect a certificate on behalf of a relative. They were common enough to be unremarkable. He continued walking. What happened next was not planned. It was not even, in any meaningful sense, a decision. It was the kind of moment that reveals a person, not the person they present to the world, but the person underneath, the one that emerges when no one important is watching. Emeka was carrying a folder, a thick manila envelope stuffed with printed lecture notes he needed to hand in the following day. He was walking quickly, not watching where his feet were going because he was talking to Tund, who had appeared at his side, and was saying something about a girl in the law department. Emeka was half laughing, half listening, and his path curved slightly to the left without him realizing it. The old woman's chair was in his way. Not entirely. A corner of it. Just enough. He did not stop. He did not step around. He simply continued forward, and his hip caught the back of her chair, and the momentum of his movement, not violent, but firm, careless, nudged the chair sideways. The ceramic mug tipped. The tea spilled across the table, across the book she was reading, and onto the edge of her wrapper. The woman looked up. She did not shout. She did not reach for her wrapper in a panic. She simply looked at Emeka with an expression that was, and this is the word that Tund would later use when he tried to describe it to others, still. Perfectly, completely still. As though she had seen this kind of thing before. As though she had expected it. Emeka stopped. He looked at the spilled tea, at the woman, at the book that was now stained and wet. And something in him, something small and quick and ugly, flared. It was not rage. It was irritation. The irritation of a man who had been interrupted, who had been, in his mind, slowed down. The old woman was looking at him with that still expression, and something about it, the lack of fear, the quiet steadiness of her gaze, made him feel, for just a moment, as though he were the one being judged. He did not like that feeling. "Mama," he said. The word came out sharper than he intended, or perhaps exactly as sharp as he intended, and he simply did not care. "Watch where you put your chair." The woman said nothing. She continued to look at him. "I said, watch where you put your chair," Emeka repeated.
His voice was louder now.
A few students at nearby tables turned to look. The old woman blinked. Then she said, very quietly, "My son, I was sitting here before you walked past." It was a simple statement. Factual. Unadorned. And it was true. Anyone watching would have confirmed it. The woman had been seated, motionless, for minutes before Emeka's careless stride had disrupted her. But Emeka did not hear the truth of it. Or rather, he heard it and dismissed it, because acknowledging it would have required him to feel something he was not willing to feel, namely, that he had been at fault. "You're blocking the walkway," he said. "I am sitting at a table," the woman replied. Still quiet, still calm. Tund, who had been watching this exchange with a growing discomfort, put a hand on Emika's arm.
Let's go.
It's fine. Emika shook him off. He did not know later exactly why he did what he did next. He would spend weeks trying to understand it, turning the moment over and over in his mind like a stone, looking for the crack that had let something through. The best he could manage was this. The woman's stillness had become, in that moment, a kind of challenge. Not an intentional one. She was not trying to provoke him. She was simply being herself, quiet, unbothered, unafraid. And for Emika, who was accustomed to a world that bent around him, her refusal to bend felt like an act of defiance.
He raised his hand.
It was not a punch. It was an open palm, moving fast, catching the side of her face, her left cheek, in a sharp, flat strike. The sound it made was small, a crack, almost, swallowed immediately by the noise of the canteen. The old woman's head turned with the force of it. She did not fall. She did not cry out. She simply turned, absorbed the blow, and then slowly, with a dignity that made several people in the canteen go completely silent, turned back to face him. The stillness had not left her eyes, but something else had entered them. Something that Emika in that instant could not read. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something older than both. Tun stepped back. His face had gone pale. The canteen had not gone silent all at once. It happened in a wave, like a ripple moving outward from the point of impact. First the tables nearest them, then the ones further out, until the only sounds were the hiss of the cooking pots and the distant murmur of students arriving who did not yet know what had happened. Emika stood there. His hand was still raised, trembling slightly, though he would not have admitted it. The old woman said nothing. She did not move to touch her cheek, did not check for injury. She simply looked at him with that same still, ancient gaze, and then, slowly, she turned back to her tea. Or what was left of it. Emika left the canteen without another word.
He did not sleep well that night.
This surprised him. Emika was not, by nature, a man who carried guilt easily. He had, over the years, developed a kind of armor against it, a way of reframing his actions that kept the sharp edges from touching him. When he had spoken dismissively to a lecturer, he told himself the man had deserved it. When he had ignored a friend's distress, he told himself he was not responsible for other people's feelings. The armor was well-fitted. It had served him for a long time. But that night, lying in his single room in the university hostel, staring at the ceiling, the armor did not hold. The image kept returning, the old woman's face turning with the blow.
The sound.
The stillness in her eyes afterward. Not pain or not only pain. Something else. Something that felt, in retrospect, less like a victim's expression and more like a verdict. He turned onto his side. Then his back. Then his other side. At some point around 2 a.m, he picked up his phone and typed a message to Tund. Did anyone see? Tund's reply came almost instantly. He, too, had not been sleeping. Everyone saw. Emika stared at the message for a long time. Then he put the phone face down on the mattress and did not pick it up again until morning. The news spread the way news spreads on a Nigerian university campus, not through any single channel, but through all of them simultaneously. WhatsApp groups. Word of mouth. The particular Nigerian talent for amplification, which could take a small incident and, within hours, give it the weight of something historic. By Friday morning, Emika had become a name. Not the name he had spent years carefully cultivating. The brilliant student, the sharp debater, the son of a successful man, but a new name. A darker one. The boy who slapped the old woman in the canteen. He found out the full extent of it when he went to breakfast at the main dining hall. He walked in with his usual stride, but this time the room did not simply notice him, it watched him. Conversations did not pause so much as redirect. Eyes followed him to his seat, and then looked away, quickly, as though proximity to him was suddenly something to be avoided. A girl at the next table, someone he vaguely recognized from the sociology department, whispered something to her friend. The friend glanced at Emika, then back, and shook her head slowly. He ate his breakfast in silence. Tund found him afterward, outside the dining hall, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets. "You need to apologize," Tund said. "No preamble. No softening." Emeka looked at him. "To who?"
To her.
"The woman. I don't even know who she is." "Then find out." Emeka was quiet for a moment. The morning sun was warm on his face, but he did not feel it.
What are people saying?
Tund hesitated. It was a small hesitation, barely a beat, but Emeka caught it because he knew Tund well enough to read his pauses. "They're saying you hit an old woman," Tund said. "In public. For no reason." "It wasn't for no reason. She was." Tund's voice was flat. Not unkind, but firm. "She was sitting at a table. You bumped her chair, and then you hit her. That's what happened. That's what everyone saw." Emeka opened his mouth, then closed it. The armor flickered just for a moment, and in that moment he saw it clearly, the way Tund saw it, the way everyone saw it. A young man, healthy and strong, striking an elderly woman across the face in a public place. Not because she had threatened him. Not because she had done anything at all. Because she had not moved out of his way. He looked at the ground. "I'll think about it," he said. Tund nodded. He did not push. He knew Emeka well enough to know that pushing would only make him retreat further into himself. So he changed the subject, something about an assignment due Monday, and the conversation drifted to safer ground. But Emeka did not think about the assignment. He thought about the old woman's face. And he thought about the way the canteen had gone silent. The days that followed were not dramatic. There was no disciplinary hearing, no formal complaint filed. The student union president, Ifani, approached Emeka on Friday afternoon, not with anger, but with a quiet, measured gravity that made him feel, oddly, more uncomfortable than anger would have. "I'm not here to punish you," she said. They were standing near the faculty building, in the shade of a jacaranda tree whose purple blossoms were beginning to fall. "The woman hasn't filed a complaint. She hasn't spoken to anyone about it as far as we know. But people know. And people are talking." Emeka nodded. "This campus," Ifani continued, "is not just students. It's staff. It's visitors. It's people who have been coming here for decades, some of them longer than you or I have been alive. When you treat someone like that, anyone, you don't just hurt them. You change how this place feels. For everyone." She left it at that. No lecture. No moral sermon. Just the observation, delivered with the kind of calm authority that made it impossible to dismiss. Emeka walked back to his hostel that evening and sat on his bed for a long time, not moving, not reading, not looking at his phone. Just sitting with the weight of it. It was Saturday night when he finally asked Tund to help him find out who the old woman was. They started with the canteen staff, a woman named Mama Ngozi, who had been running the food stall for 11 years and knew, by sight, almost every face that passed through. Emeka described the woman: the purple wrapper, the burgundy head wrap, the thermos flask, the book. Mama Ngozi thought for a moment. Then she shook her head. "I've seen her," she said. "She comes sometimes. Once or twice a week, maybe. Always sits alone. Always brings her own tea. But I don't know her name, my son. She doesn't talk much." They tried the campus security office next. An officer named Emmanuel, a quiet man with graying temples, listened to their description and checked a log of visitors. Nothing. The woman had not signed in, or if she had, her name had not been recorded clearly. They tried the bursary office, the registrar's office, a librarian who seemed to know everyone. Each time, the same result. Vague recognition, no name. "She might be someone's grandmother," Tund suggested, as they walked back across the campus in the dark. "Someone visiting. It happens." "Maybe," Emeka said. But something about the way she had carried herself, the tea, the book, the unhurried composure, did not fit the image of a visiting grandmother. There had been something else about her. Something he could not name. He did not sleep well that night either. And so, if you have been following the story, if you have felt even a fraction of the unease that Emeka felt in those days, then you already know that this is not a story about punishment. It is a story about reckoning. The quiet kind. The kind that does not announce itself with sirens or courtrooms, but settles in slowly, like dust after a storm. If this story has stirred something in you, if you want to hear where it goes and why it matters, then make sure you are on the right channel. This is Afri Tales by Annabelle. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so that when the next chapter comes, you are here. Not because I ask you to, but because stories like this one deserve to be heard all the way to the end. Monday arrived with the particular heaviness that Mondays carry when the weekend has not brought rest. Emeka went to his morning lecture, a seminar on African political philosophy, and sat in his usual seat, but he did not raise his hand once. He did not interrupt. He did not roll his eyes at the student who stumbled over a word while reading aloud. He sat, and he listened, and he thought about nothing except the old woman. After the seminar, he lingered. The lecturer, a man named Dr. Adegbite, sharp-eyed and deliberate in the way he spoke, was packing up his notes at the front of the room. Emeka approached him. "Sir," he said, "can I ask you something? Not about the course." Dr. Adegbite looked at him with mild surprise. Emeka had never approached him voluntarily before. "Of course," the lecturer said. Emeka hesitated. He was not accustomed to asking for help, not this kind anyway. "There's an old woman," he began. "I've seen her on campus. She comes alone. She reads. I don't know who she is, and he stopped. The words felt clumsy in his mouth. "I need to find out." Dr. Adegbite studied him for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not suspicion, exactly, but a careful attention, as though he were listening to more than the words. "What does she look like?" the lecturer asked. Emeka described her again. The purple wrapper, the burgundy head wrap, the thermos, the book, though he could not remember the title, or even whether he had seen the cover clearly. Dr. Adegbite was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Come with me." They walked together across the campus, past the science buildings, past the student union hall, and into the older part of the university, where the buildings were lower and the trees were taller, and the atmosphere felt different. Quieter. More settled. As though this part of the campus existed on a slightly different timeline from the rest. Dr. Adegbite led him to the Faculty of Education, a squat, brown building with wide windows and a courtyard shaded by a single enormous mango tree. He did not go inside. Instead, he stopped at the edge of the courtyard and pointed. There, on a wooden bench beneath the mango tree, sat the old woman. She was exactly as Emeka remembered her. The purple wrapper, the burgundy head wrap, the thermos flask on the ground beside her, and in her hands, a book, open, held at a slight angle, as though the light were not quite strong enough to read by comfortably. Emeka stared at her. "Who is she?" he asked. Dr. Adegbite did not answer immediately. He watched the woman for a moment, and Emeka noticed, with a start, that the lecturer's expression had changed. It was no longer the careful neutrality of a man listening to a student's question. It was something else entirely. Something close to reverence. "Her name," Dr. Adegbite said quietly, "is Professor Adiz Nwosu." The name meant nothing to Emeka. He said so. Dr. Adegbite nodded, as though he had expected this. "She retired from this university in 2009, he said. "Before you were born, most likely. Before most of the current students were born. She was the chair of the Department of Education here for nearly 2 decades. One of the first women to hold that position in any Nigerian university." He paused. The old woman turned a page of her book. "But that is not why people who knew her remember her," Dr. Adegbite continued. "They remember her because of what she did before she was a professor, and what she continued to do long after she retired." Emeka waited. In the 1970s and 1980s, the lecturer said, when Nigeria was still trying to build itself after the war, education in the rural areas was almost non-existent, especially for girls. There were villages in Anambra, in Enugu, in parts of Cross River, where no girl had ever finished secondary school. Not because they were not intelligent, because there was no school for them to attend, or because their families could not afford it, or because no one had ever told them it was possible. He stopped, looked at the woman again. Adiz Nwosu spent 15 years traveling to those villages. Not as a government official. Not as an NGO representative. As a single woman, using her own money, her own time, her own reputation. She built schools. Not with bricks and mortar at first, with tents, with borrowed classrooms, with whatever space she could find. She recruited teachers. She paid for uniforms, for books, for the small fees that kept families from pulling their daughters out. She did this quietly. She did not seek publicity. She did not write books about it. She simply did it. Dr. Adegbite's voice had dropped, almost unconsciously, as though he were speaking in a place where loud voices were not permitted. By the time she joined this university as a lecturer in 1991, she had helped establish functioning schools in over 40 communities. Thousands of girls had passed through those schools. Some of them became teachers themselves. Some became doctors. Some became politicians. The network she built, quietly, without fanfare, is still functioning today. And most people have no idea she exists. Emeka looked at the old woman. She had not moved. She was still reading, still bathed in the pale morning light, still carrying the same expression of quiet, unhurried calm that he remembered from the canteen. "Why does she come here?" Emeka asked. His voice sounded strange to him, thin, somehow. "This was her place," Dr. Adegbite said simply. She loved this university. She loved the idea of what it could be, not just for the students who were already here, but for the ones who had never been given the chance to come. She comes back sometimes, sits under the tree,
reads,
watches the young people walk by. He turned to Emeka, and for the first time, there was something pointed in his gaze. She is not a rich woman, Emeka. She spent most of her savings on those schools. She lives modestly. She is old, and she is sometimes forgotten, and when she walks through this campus, most people do not look at her twice. The words settled over Emeka like a weight, not the sharp weight of accusation, but the slow, heavy weight of understanding. He did not say anything. He could not. Dr. Adegbite left him there, at the edge of the courtyard, and walked back toward the faculty building without another word. Emeka stood for a long time, watching the old woman read her book beneath the mango tree. She did not look up. She did not seem to know he was there. Or perhaps she did, and simply chose not to acknowledge it. He was not sure which possibility felt worse.
He did not approach her that day.
He wanted to, or rather, something in him pushed toward it, the way a man pushed toward a wound he knew he needed to clean. But his feet would not carry him across the courtyard. Every time he took a step in her direction, something stopped him. Not fear, exactly. Something closer to shame. The particular paralysis of a person who has done something that cannot be undone, and knows it. So he watched. From a distance. For the rest of the morning, and into the afternoon, he stayed near the edge of the courtyard, sometimes sitting on a bench, sometimes standing in the shade of a building, and he watched Professor Adiz Nwosu read her book. She turned pages slowly. She paused sometimes, as though thinking about something she had read, or perhaps thinking about nothing at all. At one point, a small bird landed on the bench beside her, and she looked at it with a faint smile that Emeka, even from where he stood, could see clearly. It was the smile of someone who had long since made peace with solitude. Not loneliness, peace. Around noon, she packed up her things, the thermos, the book, a small cloth bag he had not noticed before, and rose from the bench with careful, deliberate movements. She walked slowly across the courtyard, toward the main campus road, and Emeka watched her go. She passed within 10 feet of him. He was standing in the shadow of a pillar, and she did not see him, or if she did, she gave no sign. He watched her disappear around the corner of the building, and then he sat down on the ground, right there on the concrete, and put his head in his hands. That evening, he called his mother. This was unusual. Emeka and his mother, Ngozi, spoke on the phone perhaps once a week, and their conversations were typically brief, a check-in, a question about his health, a reminder about some family obligation. They were not a family that expressed emotion through words. They expressed it through presence, through action, through the quiet assumption that love existed and did not need to be spoken aloud. But that evening, Emeka called her and talked for 40 minutes. He did not tell her everything. He did not tell her about the slap. He was not ready for that, not yet. But he told her about the old woman, about what Dr. Adegbite had said, about the schools and the villages and the 15 years of quiet, unseen work. His mother listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "You know, Emeka, when I was a girl in Nui, there was a woman who came to our village. I was very young, maybe 6 or 7. I don't remember her face clearly. But I remember that she smelled like chalk and soap, and that she spoke to us as though we mattered. As though we were not just village children, but people who could become anything." Emeka sat up straighter. "Did she?" he began. "I don't know if it was the same woman," his mother said. "I never learned her name. But I have thought about her many times over the years. She is the reason I insisted you go to school, even when your father said it was too expensive. She is the reason I believed it was possible." There was a pause. The line hummed softly between Lagos and Enugu. "Some people change the world quietly," his mother said. "And we never even know their names." Emeka went back to the courtyard the next day. And the day after that. And the day after that. He did not approach the old woman, Professor Nwosu, directly. Not yet. But he began to pay attention in ways he never had before. He noticed how she moved through the world, slowly, carefully, without hurry. He noticed the way she held her book, not gripping it, but cradling it, as though it were something she valued. He noticed that she always wore clean clothes, neatly arranged, and that her shoes were old but polished. He began, too, to pay attention to other things. To the old security guard at the main gate who had worked there for 22 years and whom Emeka had never once greeted by name. To the woman at the photocopy shop near the library who worked 12-hour days and always said "God bless you" to every student who walked in. To the lecturer in the humanities who arrived at 7 every morning, before anyone else, and left at 6 every evening, and whom no one had ever thanked publicly for the way she taught. He began to see them.
For the first time.
It was not a sudden transformation. It was not the kind of change that happens in a single dramatic moment. It was slower than that, a gradual shift, like the way dawn arrives. Not with a burst of light, but with a slow, quiet brightening that you only notice when you stop and look. On a Wednesday, 9 days after the incident in the canteen, Emeka found out something else about Professor Nwosu. He had been doing research. Not the obsessive, frantic kind, just quiet, careful inquiries. He asked Dr. Adegbite more questions. He visited the university archives, where a librarian named Mr. Okafor, a gentle man with bifocal glasses, helped him locate old faculty records and departmental newsletters. What he found was not a fairy tale. It was not the story of a woman who had become secretly rich, or who had connections to powerful politicians, or who was about to exact some dramatic revenge. It was something quieter, and in its way, more unsettling. Professor Adiz Nwosu had been one of the most respected educators in Nigeria's history. Not famous, respected. There was a difference. Fame demanded visibility. Respect, in its truest form, did not. She had been cited in government education reports. Her methods had been studied by international researchers. A foundation she had established, the Nwosu Girls Education Trust, had, over 30 years, funded the schooling of more than 12,000 girls across southeastern Nigeria. But she had never appeared on television. She had never given a public speech. She had never written a memoir or accepted a public award, though several had been offered. When the Nigerian government had tried to honor her, quietly, through a private ceremony, she had declined. "I did not do it for recognition," she had told the official who contacted her, according to a letter Emeka found in the archive. "I did it because it needed to be done. And if I accept a prize for it, I am no longer doing it for the right reason." Emeka read that letter 3 times. Then he closed the folder, thanked Mr. Okafor, and walked out of the archive into the afternoon sun. He stood there for a long time, letting the warmth touch his face, and thought about all the things he had taken for granted in his life. Every opportunity, every open door, every moment of ease, and wondered how many of them had been built, somewhere along the way, by hands he had never seen. It took him another week to gather the courage. Not because he was afraid of the old woman. He was not. What he was afraid of, though he would not have used that word, was the possibility that she might not care. That his apology might not matter to her. That she might receive it with the same quiet stillness she had shown in the canteen, and that this stillness might communicate something worse than anger, the understanding that people like Emeka would always exist, and that their remorse, however sincere, was simply another thing to be endured. He did not want to be endured. He wanted, for the first time in his life, to be seen, truly seen, not as the son of a successful man, not as a brilliant student, but as someone who had failed in the most basic human way and knew it. He found her on a Friday afternoon, in the same courtyard, on the same bench, under the same mango tree. She was reading again. A different book this time, thinner, with a worn leather cover. The late afternoon light was golden, and the shadows of the mango leaves moved across her hands as she turned the pages. Emeka walked toward her. His steps were quiet on the grass, quieter than usual, as though his body already knew that this was not a moment for noise. He stopped in front of her. Not too close. Close enough to be seen, but not so close as to crowd her. She looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The old woman regarded him with that same expression he remembered, calm, unhurried, reading him the way she might read a passage in a book. Not with judgment, with attention. Then she said, "Sit down if you like." He sat. On the ground, not on the bench beside her. He sat cross-legged on the grass, about 4 feet from the bench, and he looked at his hands. The silence stretched between them. It was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that has weight, that holds something the way a cup holds water. "I know who you are," Emeka said finally. His voice was quiet, steadier than he had expected. The old woman did not react. She simply waited. "I know what you did," he continued. "The schools, the villages, all of it." A pause. Then she closed her book, gently, marking her place with one finger, and looked at him fully. "And," she said, "it was not a challenge. It was a genuine question." And what? As though knowing these things about her did not, in itself, constitute a reason for him to be sitting here. Emeka swallowed. He had rehearsed this moment many times. In his head, in the shower, lying in bed at night. He had planned what to say. He had arranged the words carefully, trying to find the right balance between sincerity and accountability, between humility and dignity. But now, sitting on the grass in front of this woman, all of those carefully arranged words fell away. What came out instead was simpler than anything he had planned. "I am sorry," he said.
For what I did to you.
"In the canteen. I hit you. And I had no reason to." "None." He looked up at her. Her face was unchanged, still calm, still still. But her eyes, in the golden light, held something he had not seen before. Or perhaps he had seen it, that first day, and had not been able to read it. Something that was not anger and not pity and not disappointment. It was recognition. "I know," she said. 2 words.
Simple.
And in them, Emeka heard everything, the acknowledgement of what he had done, the weight of it, and also something else. An acceptance. Not of his action. She would never accept that, but of him. Of the fact that he was here on the ground, saying the words and meaning them. "I have seen many young people in my life," Professor Nwosu said, after a moment. She spoke slowly, choosing each word with care, the way a woman who has spent decades teaching children chooses words, not for effect, but for clarity. Some of them were kind from the beginning. Some of them were not, and they learned. And some of them, she paused, and the faintest trace of something, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, crossed her face. Some of them took longer. Emeka said nothing. There was nothing to say. "What you did was wrong," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same calm authority she might have used in a classroom. "Not because I am old, or because I am fragile, or because I have done good things in my life. It was wrong because I am a person. And every person deserves to be treated as such. That is the first lesson. The most important one." She picked up her book again, not to read, but to hold, the way some people hold a familiar object when they are thinking. "You came here to apologize," she said. "And you have. I accept it." Emeka let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. "But I want to tell you something else," she continued. "Not as a punishment. Not as a condition. Just as something I have learned in a very long life." She looked at him the way a teacher looks at a student who has, finally, asked the right question. The way we treat the people no one is watching, that is who we are. Not the way we present ourselves in classrooms or to our parents or to the world. The way we treat the old woman at the canteen, the security guard at the gate, the cleaner in the corridor. That is the measure. Everything else is performance. The mango leaves rustled above them. Somewhere in the distance, a student laughed, a bright, uncomplicated sound that belonged to a different world from this quiet courtyard. "I have spent my life trying to give young people the chance to become something," Professor Nwosu said. "Not because I believe everyone will use that chance well, but because I believe everyone deserves it, even the ones who have not yet earned it." She looked at him one last time, and in that look was everything: the reprimand, the forgiveness, the quiet, unshakable dignity of a woman who had spent 60 years building something the world would never fully see, and who had done it not for recognition but because it was right.
"Go now," she said, gently.
"And be better." Emeka stood. He bowed his head, not deeply, not performatively, but with a sincerity that surprised even him. Then he turned and walked away from the bench, across the grass, toward the edge of the courtyard. He did not look back. Not because he did not want to, but because he understood, instinctively, that this moment was not about him. It had never been about him. It was about her, about what she had built, and what she represented, and what it meant that someone like her could walk through a university campus and be invisible to someone like him. He walked back through the main campus road, past the canteen where it had all begun, past the dining hall, past the library. The campus moved around him, students laughing, arguing, eating, living, and for the first time he saw all of it. Not as background, not as scenery, as life. Messy, complicated, irreducible life, happening all around him, carried by people he had never bothered to notice. He did not tell anyone about the conversation under the mango tree. Not Tund, not Chidinma, not anyone. Some things, he understood now, were not meant to be shared. They were meant to be carried, quietly, privately, as a kind of debt that could never be fully repaid but could, over time, be honored. In the weeks that followed, small changes appeared in Emeka's life. He began greeting the security guard at the main gate, not with a grand gesture, but with a nod, a simple good morning. He learned the man's name, Emmanuel. He began asking the canteen staff how their day was going and listening to the answer. He stopped interrupting in seminars, not out of sudden humility, but out of a new awareness that other voices deserved the space he had been taking. Tun noticed. He did not comment on it directly, he knew better than that. But one evening, walking back from the library together, he said, "You seem different, E." Emeka shrugged. "Maybe," he said. And that was all. Professor Adiz Nwosu continued to come to the courtyard on her quiet schedule, once or twice a week, sometimes more. She continued to sit under the mango tree and read her books and drink her tea. She did not seek out Emeka, and he did not seek out her. But sometimes, on afternoons when they were both there, he would see her from across the courtyard, a small figure in a purple wrapper, bathed in light, and he would feel something settle in his chest. Not guilt, exactly. Not anymore. Something quieter than that. A kind of awareness. A permanent, low hum of remembering. He did not know, and would never know, the full scope of what Professor Nwosu had built. 12,000 girls. 40 communities. A lifetime of work that had never made headlines, never won public praise, never been celebrated in the way the world celebrates its heroes. But he knew this. She had changed the world. Not loudly. Not dramatically. One village at a time, one girl at a time, one quiet act of belief at a time. And he had struck her across the face for sitting in his path. Years later, long after he had graduated, long after he had built his own career, Long after the memory of that Thursday afternoon in the canteen had faded from the daily texture of his life and settled instead into something deeper, something permanent, Emeka would sometimes think about Professor Nwosu. He thought about her when he saw an old woman on a bus and offered her his seat without being asked. He thought about her when he hired a young woman from a rural village for a position at his company and watched her, over months, grow into the role with a quiet confidence that reminded him of something ancient and unstoppable. He thought about her when his own daughter, born years later, named after no one in particular, but carrying, without knowing it, the weight of a lesson her father had learned on the grass beneath a mango tree, asked him, at age 7, why he always said please to the people who cleaned their house. Because they deserve it, he said. And his daughter looked at him with wide, curious eyes and said, "Of course they do, Papa. Why wouldn't they?" And Emeka smiled, a small, private smile, and thought, yes. Why wouldn't they? That was the question. The one Professor Nwosu had been asking, in her quiet way, for 60 years. The one she had spent her life trying to make possible for others to answer. Why wouldn't they? It was, in the end, the simplest question in the world. And the hardest one to learn. This story is not about punishment. It is not about revenge or justice, or the dramatic comeuppance that we so often wish upon the arrogant. It is about something quieter, and, I think, more powerful. It is about seeing. Truly seeing the people around you. The ones the world overlooks, the ones who carry greatness without noise, the ones who have already changed everything and will never be thanked for it. Professor Nwosu did not need Emeka's apology to be whole. She was whole long before he walked into her life. But he needed to give it, because it was the first honest thing he had ever done. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, even for a moment, and think about the people in your own life who go unseen, then it has done what it was meant to do. This is Afri Tales by Annabelle. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel, do it now, not for me but for the stories. There are more coming. Stories about the people we forget, the lessons we almost miss, and the quiet moments that change us forever. Like this video. Share it with someone you know. And come back. Because every story deserves to be heard all the way to the end. And so does every person.